Hello, guys. My name is Rex, Jung Ho Park, but I go with Rex. I am currently teaching IB Business Management, and I also do teach economics. But today, I'm going to talk about how I teach IB Business Management in IB the Top, and what are my teaching styles, how I try to teach the students, and also a little bit about me, so that you guys can have a better understanding of who you're going to take class with and what you are going to learn if you do come into my class. So let's get right to it. Table of contents. Today, I'm going to first give you a little explanation about myself, the instructor, curriculum, like how we're going to learn our stuffs, in what order, and when we're going to learn what. Common difficulties, two specific difficulties. First is writing in IBO style. A second being understanding and bridging topics. This may sound a little confusing at the moment, but later on you will get a grasp of what I'm trying to say. And lastly, I'm going to talk briefly about my class style to you guys. So to start off, a little introduction about myself. So I went to Columbia University. I majored in political science, and political science and economics are the two major most popular majors in Columbia University. So I think 35% are in economics and 25 to 20% in political science. I might be wrong, but that's what I know. So I majored in political science. For high school, I went to Brand International School. It's located in the Philippines. Of course, I did the IB diploma. I was in your shoes. I was in the same position as you guys, but I was a hardworking student. I can say it with confidence. I graduated as valedictorian. I don't know if you guys have it, but in my school, we have something called an IB Subject Award, which is an award that's given to students who score the highest mark in their subjects, business, econ, and all the other six subjects I took. I actually received the subject award for all those six subjects 2, 3 years straight. Um, I also, participated in a lot of ECs, extracurricular activities, including MUN, GIN, NHAs, blah blah blah, a lot of stuff. So, I am pretty confident in what I teach, and I'm also pretty confident that I teach well, based on the fact that I also was in your shoes and I was also studying this, and I also did very good on these subjects and IB in general. My experience, I'm going to go briefly over it. I've been teaching IB for like 5, 6 years. 5, 6 years. I started in Jeju in the Philippines. I was teaching IB economics, business management, but I also taught like TOK, English, on the side a little. But my main focus was economics and business. I was also a HLab Tokyo Global Mentor. If you guys don't know what HLab is, it's like a program where they invite the top high school Japanese students into a camp, and then they would bring global mentors from all around the world, from the top universities, to guide them. So that was what I'm doing. And at the moment, I'm at IB the Top teaching economics and business management. So I'm going to go briefly about the curriculum, but let me just start out on what the schedule kind of looks like, right? So this summer, the DP1 students will be learning about chapter 1 and 2, which is HR and business organizations and environment. For DP2 students, they'll be learning chapter 4 and 5, which is marketing and operations management. And then this coming winter, the DP1 students will be learning finances and accounts, chapter 3. DP2 students, well, they have to prep for their IB exam, so they'll be reviewing chapter 1 to 3, reviewing 4 to 5, and then doing a lot of past papers and really getting ready for the actual exam. Um, so if you look at the chart on the slide, you see that there is highlighted sentences. For example, Unit 3, Finances Account, that's highlighted, and there's also bolded units 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So what this means is the highlighted parts are the parts that students struggle with, in my opinion, and the bolded letters are the parts that are kind of, I think, not really taught in depth at school. That's why we're going to try to focus on these topics a little more. So most difficult chapter for DP1 is finances and accounts, as highlighted in bold. Sorry, in black. And this is due to the calculations that are involved in the chapter, right? So students either struggle to memorize all the necessary equations and the necessary concepts that are in the chapter. And due to a large coverage, chapter 3, as you can see, is a pretty large coverage. They tend to get these equations and the concepts mixed with one another. So that's one problem. And second, the application of the equations is also very tough on the actual exam. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever tried the past papers on finances accounts, but if you do try them, some questions do not actually show you or tell you explicitly which equations or concepts you're supposed to use. Rather, you have to use the charts or numbers that are given to you to kind of identify the equation you're supposed to use in the question, which is what makes it so tricky, right? Um, and the bolded parts, unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2.6, 2.7. These are chapters that many schools and teachers tend to overlook and kind of like skim through, just pass by real quick. But I think they're also very important. I mean, every chapter in business in general, every single one of them are as important as one another, right? So we really need to, focus on these topics as much as much as other topics as well in my class, so that even if you did skim through them or didn't learn much about them in school, you'll be able to really fill in the gap through my class. For DP2 students, the most difficult topic for DP2 is the 7Ps. I don't know if you learned it, but you will know it is a very difficult chapter. And the reason is pretty similar, is that the application of this chapter is very difficult in the test because it's such a big topic with so much information. Applying them in texts that are given to you in the test is just very difficult. Once again, the bolded chapters are content that is overlooked in school. In terms of operations management, the reason is because this chapter is in the last part of your book. And what school tends to do is they skim through it because first, they either lack the class time, or second, the teacher believes it's not very important, but they are important. Operations management is as important as marketing and other chapters as well. So we will delve into that. Okay. So if come into my come into my class or take my class, I think one perk that you will get from my classes that I don't like skipping topics, meaning I never value one topic lesser than the other. I mean, there will be some concepts that I will emphasize on and say this is very, very important, and these are not as important as the other in a sense that it's easier or it's not handled much in the exams as much other topics, but you still have to know them. Okay. So I tend to go through every little detail on the topics. First, to make sure you know everything. Second, to make sure that you understand everything as well, right? And you don't have any gaps in your knowledge. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna now move on to the two major problems I think that are most common in business management. And the first is writing. I don't know if you guys do take economics as well, but for students who take economics and business management, both classes, you will know that they are somewhat different because economics, in my personal opinion, is somewhat easier for students who are not good at applications because the answer is pretty set and it's pretty straightforward. If you look at the question, you know what graph to draw, and you just have to elaborate upon the graph and apply the concepts that you have memorized from your textbook. So, economics, that's how you would answer the question. But in business, you need to be kind of very careful with how you write because you don't have any graphs. Sometimes you don't even have tangible numbers to play around with. So it solely depends on how you write and how you elaborate and how you explain the answer. Okay, so these two are very different styles of writing. Depending on if you're business management or if you're in economics. So, but today I'm going to talk about the writing style that business management requires. Okay, let's dive in. So, two of the main reasons why students fail to achieve a 7 or a high mark in the IB business management exams are due to the issues in either, as I mentioned, the writing style, where they fail to write in a way that the IB wants them to write, or due to having difficulties in understanding and bridging the topics, which I'm going to elaborate a little later on. Okay. First, I'm going to elaborate on the writing issue. Okay. So on this slide, this is a paper 2 question from a past paper in 2022. So the question asks, recommend either option 1 or 2, which is a very common question that you face in paper 2 questions. And this is just an exemplar answer that is written based on option one, which is adaptive creativity. Okay. Now, let's see why this might be not the best answer. Okay. So the first green highlighted sentence, first of all, does not explicitly state the argument that you're trying to answer. Okay. In other words, your argument, your direct answer to the question is not clear in the first sentence. It rather provides a circumstance or a condition for your argument, showing which position ER is placed at the moment by simply saying that they're in a difficult position and that there is an increase in competition, right? This is not wrong, technically. This is not wrong. But it is generally better and easier to write the answer and I mean to write the argument in your first sentence right away. Okay, and make your argument explicit in the first sentence. Okay. Secondly, the blue sentence, it also has some problems. It is confusing because it does not segregate the argument, meaning the direct answer to the question, from the evidence. But you're talking about two things at once, which is adaptive creativity is not effective. E-scooters are not considered a new innovation to the customers, right? Now, due to this here, it is difficult to determine whether the first green sentence is the reasoning for your argument or if the blue sentence is the reasoning for your argument. So the marker is confused what your direct answer to the question is and what your subsequent reasoning is due to the structure of the essay, right? Now the purple sentence is also unclear, and this part gets a little tricky. So stick with me, okay? Stay with me. It vaguely states that it won't be an attractive product, okay? Prompting the marker to question why is it not attractive, okay? When you answer any business management questions, you should make sure that the marker have the least or the smallest room for questioning why to your answers, okay? You may think, well, if you look at the purple sentence, you may actually think that it does actually show the reason because you could think that you have mentioned that it does not have innovative creativity, right? But in fact, you have not mentioned that customers prefer such technology over other products, thus failing to prove why customers don't like it. So if you simply say that ER fails to show them to the customers, that is different from saying that customers prefer innovative items, thus it would fail to be persuasive to them. Okay? Now, let's look at the better example. Let's see what happens here. If you look at the green part of the sentence, it has a clear thesis statement of the argument. It's stated in the first sentence saying adaptive creativity is unlikely to create a new USP, right? Which allows the markers to clearly know that that is the direct answer to the question, okay? Rather than your explanation or evidence. It also provides a reason to it at the end. If you look, there's a little part, but it's not a detailed reason, okay? But rather signals to the markers that this is a factor you'll be expanding on, okay? The second sentence serves to provide clear evidence for your thesis, the argument that you stated in the green area, which shows that you are referencing your claim from the text and not from assumptions. And this part is very important as it shows where in the text you are grounding your argument from. And the last purple sentence provides a clear reasoning for your argument. The reasoning is clear and precise by saying that by stating that they are already globally available, therefore same positioning would not be sufficient. Okay, so any argument you make, there must be a reasoning to it. Okay, backing up reasoning or an evidence or an argument or a claim. Okay, now a very crucial difference from the previous answer is that the sentences in this good example builds up gradually in a logical order. Okay, for instance, the blue sentence states that customers, prefer innovative products, which is what allows the purple sentence to make sense and be effective. So each sentence do not serve different purposes or create gaps or confusion in information, but acts to make the next following sentence more accurate. So there's a logical flow to it. Okay, there was a lot of information at once. So how am I gonna teach you this, or how am I gonna make you guys be able to do this in my class? First of all, obviously, we'll do a lot of practices, right? We're gonna do practices and we're gonna make this a habit, right? Whatever you do in class, I'm gonna probably require this and I'm gonna expect this from you guys, okay? Secondly, I am gonna provide you a physical worksheets and also physical guidelines, little tool chart in how to form these logical flows of arguments in your answer. Okay, so through these practice worksheets or tool sheets or repetitive practices through answering questions in my class, you will be able to form such a seven marker, a very well grounded argument as time goes on in my class. Okay. Okay, great. Let's move on to the second problem, understanding and bridging the topics. So, what this part is talking about is that IBI business management requires you to be able to interconnect different chapters and utilize numerous concepts in one answer rather than just knowing and applying one specific unit into your answer sheet. Okay, so let's look at this example, right? So it says discuss the impact on MM's marketing and blah, 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 blah. You can read the question. And this is an exemplar answering that looks into the price of the marketing mix. So this is an answer that's doing the marketing mix, but specifically looking into the price aspect. Okay. Now, the example here is not wrong. Okay, this is not a wrong answer. Okay. It still utilizes concepts from the marketing mix, and it may be sufficient to get you a 6 out of 7 in the test. Okay, because you're still on topic, right? It draws upon evidences from the text and blends in with topics within marketing, creating a somewhat persuasive argument. Okay. However, the answer seems somewhat too limited, okay, within the boundaries of marketing. And let's see how we can further develop this into a better answer. If you look at this this answer itself already, I've put in brackets different chapters that have been utilized in the answer, has a lot more chapters compared to this, which just focused on marketing itself. But if you look at this answer, they've used concepts from different chapters in marketing and also operations management. But one important thing in doing this is to still stay on track with the main unit, though, which is marketing mix. As you can see in each sentence, still grounds its argument on marketing, but the other knowledge are only there to support the answer rather than taking lead in the sentences. So, for instance, the first part talks about custom prices, which still is in the boundary of the marketing mix of price, right? Which is the first highlighted part. But as on the content of customization, a concept that is covered in operations method, right? So, in addition, the last sentence as well talks about niche market and how it could limit the flexibility of the company. This sentence shows, how the student considered, or this answer considered, other topics in marketing, which could potentially also be relevant to the circumstances that the business in the case study is in. Okay. So I personally think understanding and bridging the topics is a lot more difficult than the first problem I talked about, the writing issue, simply because it requires you to first know all the topics that in business management, which is pretty tough. Second, it's not easy to connect the dots at first. I mean, when I was in high school, it took me ages to do this too. Okay. But how we're going to try to solve this or how I even solved it when I was in high school and how we're going to solve it in my classroom is through constant mind practices. This can only be improved if you constantly try to connect your answer with multiple numerous business topics. And I'm going to explain later on the style of my teaching, but in my class, there's a lot of interaction and discussion that goes on. And that's what really fosters this mindset. I'm going to constantly attack your arguments, attack your answers, and attack your thought processes to make sure that you're able to connect the dots. I'm constantly going to ask you and question you. So, what could this lead to? Or what chapter could this possibly also connect to? And if this is the case, what other units are also applicable here? And through multiple practices and discussions, and I'm obviously going to also tell you that the general rule of thumbs, there is a general rule of thumbs in connecting the dots. There's usually these subtopics, for example, find money or growth, or there's these several key terms which helps you connect the dots and create a web, which I am also going to provide you and teach you how to utilize in my class. So if you come into my class, this will be carried out as practice numerous times so that you will be a master of it at the end of the day. Okay. Um, so the fun part, I guess. I'm going to talk a little about my class style, right? As a teacher, A part of my job is to make students engage well, compare you know um, to other classes, I guess. Or I mean, that's something what a teacher is supposed to do, and I try my best to make that happen, right? And if you take in classes with me online, right, I know that it's difficult. It's difficult because when you're not physically there, and if your presence is not there, and if my presence is not there, learning gets a little boring sometimes, and it gets less interactive, and it could get boring, right? But my class, I try to resolve these problems, right? One aspect of my class that I think from what my past students really liked is that many of my students think that I am someone who's very easy to approach within the classroom. Okay. I don't know, you might have also realized it watching this video, but I am someone who's very talkative, very fun to talk to, I hope, and also very engaging. Okay. This is due to, a few factors. One, one is that my class itself is very engaging. I do have times where I have to lecture, when I have to really inject information and knowledge to you guys, but there are a lot of moments where I ask questions to you guys in return, or engage in discussions on the topic we're learning. Okay, and also explain real life applications of topics that we learn in class. Okay, and due to this, many of my students tend to feel a lot closer, and get closer to me a lot quicker as well, and feel comfortable in being themselves in my class. Um, and I think one very good result of this is that they also ask a lot of questions because they just simply feel a lot more comfortable in my class, right? And the more you ask questions and the more you utilize me and my time and my class, you are going to learn more, right? So I think it creates a very positive synergy between me and the student due to my class being very interactive, very a lot of heavy discussions, and and my students feeling very comfortable in my class, right? And when I say discussions, I don't mean me just saying you're wrong, I'm right, so learn, right? That's not how discussions work, right? I try to listen where the students are coming from, and I would tell them if it's wrong. I would tell them, yeah, that's wrong. That's not the way you should do, right? But I also try to reflect and try to think the way that my students think, in the way that my students think, to see where they're actually coming from, right? Because that's the only way I can see where the thought process went wrong, and I can really teach you and tell you where you need to fix. So I think a discussion is also a very profound element of my class. So, if you come to my class, it's going to be fun. I mean, of course, we're going to cover everything we have to cover, and I'm going to teach you a lot of content. It could be a little tough in learning all of these contexts, but I can guarantee you it's going to be very enjoyable. So that was it. I think, and I'm very confident in really making things possible for my students, in a sense that I really help them and I really make it possible for them to reach their goals, whether it's getting an IB, 7 or a 6, because everybody has different goals, right? But I am pretty sure and I am very confident that you can, I mean, not just you, but anyone who's watching this video can succeed in my class, and all of my students have improved a lot. Um, and I think one of the reasons why many students tend to, struggle or kind of find classes not very effective is because they're not guided in the right way, right? Because every students have different learning patterns and they learn in different ways. But as I told you, due to my my ability to create engaging classes and comfortable classes and enjoyable classes, I try to really impose a different teaching style to each and every one of my students. Because everybody has different learning styles, and I cater to that need to make sure that all of my students succeed. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you had a lot of takeaways, and I hope you learned a lot about me. And I hope to see you in class. Thank you.